Hello, I'm Sanjay Pulipaka. Welcome to the latest edition of Global Perspectives. Today we are interacting with Vas Shenoy. He is an Indo-Italian entrepreneur. He was appointed in 2023 as Chief Representative for Italy by the Indian Chamber of Commerce. He was the first to host India Forum in Italy. He works with the leading senators there to nurture and strengthen India-Italy relations, India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor. He also hosts Track 1.5, Track 2 initiatives to strengthen India-Italy relations, promote economic engagement between India and Italy, and also between India and Europe. Mr. Vas Shenoy, welcome to Global Perspectives.
Thank you so much, Sanjay. Thank you for having me.
How is the weather in Rome today?
Well, rainy and cold, but we had sunshine yesterday, so we were a little lucky.
Thank you. The first and the most important question that I want to ask you, Italy is playing a T20 Cricket World Cup in India. Well, how did that happen? We know Italy is a football crazy nation. How is the media reporting about this participation in this T20 World Cup of all the things? And how is the perception there?
Actually, Sanjay, let me correct you here. Italy has a very old history of cricket. The Genoa Cricket Club was actually established in the late 1800s by a group of British expats, and the football craze is more a modern, relatively a modern issue, but cricket has traditionally been played in Italy from a very old times, specifically given Genoa's closeness to the UK and Britain. And of course, a very large shipbuilding and maritime culture of the country. But in the modern time, you're right, it's a football crazy nation. Cricket has caught on. A chunk of this is because of Italian diaspora in English speaking countries. As you know, Italy has probably almost 60 million diaspora members all over the world, and there's a large concentration in Australia, in the United States, in certainly a larger concentration in the UK, even post Britain's EU involvement, but even anciently. So you have a chunk of this diaspora that's bringing back, the cricketing craze to the country, and then you have the new migrants. So now you have second and third generation migrants from the Indian subcontinent. For example, in Monfalcone, which is a little town near Trieste, has a very large Bangladeshi population that's migrated there due to the shipbuilding business. And these came in as workers in the 80s and the 90s, and now the second and the third generations have grown up on a mixed, Indian subcontinent Italian culture and have brought in cricket as a primary sport that they play. So you have external outward migration by Italians and inward migration into Italy to account for Italy's first T20 qualification, and we just hope that it gets better.
Before we move on to the geopolitics and geoeconomic issues, one of the things that I want to ask you is how did you get interested in Italy? How did you relocate there? You have mastered Italian. How did that happen?
Well, I actually won a scholarship when I was 15 to the United World College of the Adriatic, which is a small international school near Trieste. Again, kind of seems to be a place and a pattern. I was 15 and I had the choice in between, I think it was Norway and Italy, and I decided Norway was too cold and Italy was fabulous because it was warmer than Norway was. I fell in love with the country. I came back to India for 5 years after my IB, but I realized that my future was here. So I was probably one of the few cultural migrants and not economic migrants. I didn't come back to Italy for economic reasons. I came back because I was just in love with the country and I wanted to live here.
When I referred to your brief bio in the introduction, you were the chief representative of Indian Chamber of Commerce in Italy. Can you tell us more about your work there, because you are involved in many initiatives there?
Look, I see myself more as not just the chief representative of the Indian Chamber of Commerce, which is one of India's oldest chambers, and the ICC just celebrated its centenary, just finished its centenary celebrations this year. 2025 was its centenary year. So the ICC brings about a large culture of India's industrial history having been set up in 1925 in Kolkata on the inspiration of Mahatma Gandhi. Mr. Birla set it up then, and it has in some way borne witness to India's transformation from the 1920s right up to now, Atmanirbhar Bharat, and India's arrival as the fourth largest economy on earth. So, in a way, it is also a role where I get to speak about India's modern achievements and not just India's reputation as a cultural superpower or a philosophical country, or its long history, but also what modern India today stands for. And I think in the West there is a large perception, lack of perception as well, of India's achievements as a modern society and how much the country has changed in the past 10 years under Prime Minister Modi's leadership. I mean, I myself left India in 2002 and have not returned to India very often. But every time I've returned in the past, the change hasn't been so shocking even. And in the past 10 years, on the other hand, the transformation of India has been amazing as far as infrastructure goes, as far as the use of technology in day-to-day activities go, and it's really at some points it's even more digital than the West, especially when it comes to electronic payments. So I think I have a very unique role, which is to bear witness to India's actual growth from a colony to a superpower, and I take that very seriously, and I'm very glad to do it. Very honored.
India-Italy relations have witnessed upswing in the recent past. What explains this reset? More than a reset, it's a genuine uptick in the bilateral relationship. What explains this phenomena?
I think it's multi-level. I think sometimes when you come out of a really bad phase of relationships with people, with countries, there's only one way up, and that's up. So I think that's first. That's the first part. But I think both countries are very similar. They're both cultural superpowers. They're both maritime countries which project into their seas. They're both family oriented. The concentration of businesses is small and medium enterprises, and industries are more in the hands of families rather than in the hands of corporate groups. So I think culturally, the countries have a lot in common. The upswing, I think, was a natural, thing waiting to happen. I think it was just about the leaders finding the right chemistry. I think the first breaking of ice was when Prime Minister Modi visited during Mario Draghi's prime ministership, visited Rome for G20 in October 2021. And I think the personal dynamic between the two leaders broke the ice on various pending issues and started a new era. And Prime Minister Meloni has, mastered the master, where she is a charming young woman who believes in her country, believes in her values, and has used that to build a bridge to Prime Minister Modi, who's also somebody who strongly believes in his country and stands for his values. So I think when you have people, when you have leaders who speak the same language, it's very easy to find common ground. And once the leaders find common ground, the bureaucracies have to follow.
Are there any specific sectors do you think both countries should focus in the bilateral cooperation, or do you see a full spectrum cooperation between the two countries?
I think generally there is a full spectrum cooperation, but I think more can be done in defense. Italy is home to some of the most important defense companies on earth, and these can bring a lot of value to India. I think India can bring a lot of value on a bunch of industrial issues to Italian automotive industries, etc. For example, the Mahindra Group very early on saw the vision where Italian design could be implemented in Indian automotive and bought out Pininfarina, bought out a majority stake in Pininfarina. I think there are lots of examples if one were to go where the countries are complementary, where Italy can bring in the technology, the luxury, India can bring in the numbers, the critical mass, and the engineers. I think there's a lot of complementarity between the two countries. I think it just needs to be expressed.
One of the initiatives which caught the imagination in the recent past is India Middle East Europe Economic Corridor. and it was launched on the sidelines of G20 in New Delhi in 2023. Can you provide us what is the background for this? What is the geopolitics? Because one of the things that we hear is there is a concern in Europe, and also some countries see it as an opportunity that the Arctic sea lanes are opening up. How have the European countries seen this phenomenon of Arctic sea lanes, and does it have any connection with India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor?
I think the competition of sea lanes has been the history of human trade. So if you go to see whether the fall of Egypt to the Rashidun Caliphates at a time where Roman dominance was decreasing, or you see the fall of Constantinople to the Ottomans, I think it was all, an attempt to control trade, and who controls trade routes controls power. There is a strong push by China and Russia to control the Arctic route, which could or could not happen given the climatic conditions, given the fact that it's not necessarily feasible for use 12 months of the year. I think there is a push very strongly by these two powers because they want to create a sea lane that is independent of others despite the cost. I think there is an environmental cost to be paid, which is huge. There is definitely concern in Europe about the Mediterranean and the Mediterranean's role towards the Atlantic. There's also a big challenge with the failed states in the Bab el Mandab and in the Red Sea, which have been in the news very recently. So whether it is Somalia, whether it's Eritrea, whether it is Yemen on the other side of the Bab el Mandab, these are countries, and these are 20, 30-year-old stories, so this is not anything new, which have challenged modern trade routes. In the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor, to me, is a vision that comes out of Delhi with strong support from the United States then. I think the whole concept was to future-proof India's trade routes, both to Europe and eventually the United States on one end. But on the other end, at the same time, even though it was not expressed as an actual trade route, India went ahead with BeamStec on the east as a part of its Look East policy, where it created another very open line of trade, which is still blocked now because of Bangladesh and a series of other problems east. But these are India's future-proof routes to establish its centrality in the Indo-Pacific, which is absolutely important if India needs to become a superpower. I think the roads from Europe to Far East pass through India, and how India manages this is the reflection in IMEC, is the reflection in BeamStec. Of course, there are challenges like the Arctic route that will come and go. There is the middle trade route that the Chinese have tried to establish that comes by train. I think the problem with China's approach is that they're owned by China, they're paid for by China, they're pushed by China, and China likes to control them. India's approach is more Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the whole world is one family, everybody pitches in, it's very, very collaborative. The Saudis will do something, the Israelis will do something, the Emiratis will do something. It's an approach that takes much longer time and may not guarantee you results, but it is an approach that creates ownership by stakeholders and creates that family concept. So I think it's more democratic and more sustainable in the long run. I don't like, I doubt, forced, singularly owned ego trips are sustainable in the long run. So I would rather say the IMEC would be a long-term success, even though there are short-term issues.
Referring to IMEC as something very democratic and collaborative. So therefore, there are a lot of ports that are talked about with reference to India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. How does the port selection happen? What is the criteria? Or do you think the market forces themselves will take care of which ports should be part of IMEC, and how do we strengthen this connectivity network?
First of all, IMEC begins with an I. So I think the first important part is India and India's projection of where the trade route needs to go. That said, India's approach has always been rather collaborative and I would say democratic. So it has a lot to also do with market forces and partner countries. I don't think there is a need for a singular IMEC terminal port on the other side. But if you go logically, India has a very strong relationship with East European countries. And you have Trieste, which has a maritime rail corridor already established with 12 of countries in Central and Eastern Europe. So Trieste becomes a strong contender naturally for IMEC, not because the Italian government will so or the Indian government will so, but because containers have to travel and it's the shortest route possible, and nobody can deny that. Now, business isn't going to pay $20 extra to ship a container somewhere else to satisfy some political agenda. Business is going to look for the cheapest and the most practical way of getting the container from one end to another. So I see that as a political reality also because of India's foreign policies and politics. I see also Marseille is there. There is Taranto in the south of Italy. So there is Genoa, which could be a corridor to Switzerland, which does not have ports. So there are lots of options. So IMEC is not just bound by one set of ports. I do see that existing infrastructure will be a strong requirement or a strong consideration when ports are chosen. So what is existing versus what needs to be built and how much time will that take? So I think that'll dictate more the selection of ports.
When you visualize India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, is it a standalone connectivity initiative or does it plug into other initiatives, say, for instance, Three Seas initiative in Europe? And can you explain something about that?
See, I see this approach, if you permit me to say this, a little academic. There are hurdles for a container to move from one point to another. The hurdles are physical, and the hurdles are economic, and the hurdles finally are customs oriented. So now you have the EU-India Free Trade Agreement, which creates a full mobility to the EU 27 states of all the containers. Add to this the India-Italy Ports Agreement, which is supposed to be signed sometime soon. It's still waiting for the Indian Cabinet's approval. Do that and you have a smooth movement of containers once they arrive at ports here. The cheapest, again, cost of transport goes from, dictates another particular part. So while it comes to the Three Seas initiative, I think that there is very little to plug in per se because there's a large chunk of the Three Seas group which already belongs to the EU, which already has connectivity from Trieste by rail, which has already connectivity from several important European ports by road. So it's already connected. So, I don't think you need to work to plug in something. Of course, it would be nice if Italy were to sign the Three Seas agreement because that would make some of the customs procedures far easier and would bring down costs, etc. But the containers will move if you let them move. So I don't think there is a major issue actually having them to be strategically plugged in at a very senior level. The EU-India FTA is a game changer, of course, because without that, IMEC would have been very incomplete and not as useful.
One of the important components in the IMEC is the Middle East component. And we have seen in the recent past, political stability has been a challenge in the Middle East. How is Europe and more specifically Italy looking at it? What are the strategies that are being planned to address this political instability or respond to political instability to operationalize IMEC?
Are you looking at the UAE-Saudi rift or are you referring to more the Yemen instability?
There is United Arab Emirates, Saudi rift that is going on. We know about Red Sea, Yemen, and the challenges that are there. And then there are challenges with Israel in the recent past, Israel, Gaza, and all those things. So if you take an overarching view of all these things, of course, there are three very different segments and also interrelated in some ways. How do you see Europe responding to this in terms of operationalizing IMEC?
I think Europe and Israel have very strong relationships, specifically if you go between Italy and Israel, they're very strong relationships. And these go beyond just security and traditional relationships. Italy and the UAE also have a very strong relationship to the point where the Italian head of state, President Mattarella, was just a guest in the UAE himself. Also, with Saudi Arabia, Italy's relationship is extremely strong. I don't see these small skirmishes create a bigger problem in the bigger picture. What is essential after the EU India FTA is something that I've always said, that for IMEC's success, the Saudi Israel approach more needs to happen. In some way, Saudi Arabia and Israel need to officially be able to recognize each other, maybe not full diplomatic recognition, maybe not opening of embassies, but there at least needs to be a basic amount of recognition to let containers pass if IMEC has to be successful.
One of the other important variable in India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor, as you pointed out, has been United States. Its support on the sidelines of G20 was critical in pulling this thing together. How is Europe dealing with Trump's policies and statements on Greenland? What is its impact on European thinking? Do you think Europe will engage, or which has been engaging with Asia, but will it increase the density of interactions with the large Asian economies?
Well, I think you have your answer on the 26th, 27th of January. You had President von der Leyen say
True.
it was the mother of all trade deals.
Yeah.
I think India and Europe already account for 25% of the world's GDP and 2 billion people. So I think it's one fourth of the world's population now. Um, I think President Trump has a very unique way of looking at things, but eventually the result is what needed to have happened for a very long time. Europe needed to spend more for its defense. Europe needed to consider that its defense was its own priority and could not depend on the United States. I think these are independent issues between allies. Neither President Trump nor the Europeans have ever questioned the transatlantic alliance. I think Prime Minister Meloni as well has been a bridge in between President Trump and the European leaders when it comes to the transatlantic alliance. I don't think there will be a change in the actual format of the transatlantic alliance. What might change is the weightage each partner brings to the table. And many people here in Europe itself have said that there is a need for European countries to step up and put more and have more ownership of their own security and their own politics vis-a-vis the United States. So even in the Middle East, I see President Trump have his own unique way of doing things. These may be understood, not understood, may be considered to be very flamboyant or very volatile at times. Maybe the form is not the typical traditional diplomatic form that the world is used to, but some disruption has never hurt. And allies will figure things out. Friendships are not perfect. Friendships are, however, relationships where you can actually put your points of view and discuss them before you go to war. So, as Prime Minister Modi said to President Putin, this is no longer an age of war. So, I do believe that whatever will be resolved diplomatically.
You just referred to India-Europe Free Trade Agreement, citing the European leaders, the mother of all deals. What is your assessment of this free trade agreement? Do you think it will get ratified this year, or do you think the process will get delayed? How does this thing work in Europe?
I think, as far as the European side goes, this is one deal that sees all the majority parties in the EU support it. I think it has been long coming. It has not happened because there hasn't been enough activation energy. But I think way before the Trump tariff, I call them the Trump tariff tantrums happened, President von der Leyen came with the 27 commissioners to India and committed that before the end of the year, the EU India, and I think that was also reflected by Prime Minister Modi, the EU India FTA would be finalized, and it has done so. I completely have faith that from the European end, it will be ratified before the end of 2026 to go into effect by the 1st of January 2027. There is very strong business push for this to happen. So we're looking forward that the same thing happens on the Indian end, because it's the Indian end that also has to ratify it.
I mean, the ratification processes are pretty easy on the Indian side, unlike the European Union. It is just the cabinet that has to sit and approve the FTA. But if you see the overall thrust in India-Europe engagement, there has been an uptick. Is this a consequence of how Indian economy is performing, or the geopolitical push and pulls on the European side, which is prompting them to engage more with India. Uh, what is your assessment of this? What more should India, Europe, or India, Italy should do more to consolidate the relationship that they have currently?
Well, Sanjay, let me remind you that India and Europe have had a millennial relationship, and it's nothing new. It was the trade routes for India that caused wars in Europe, and not vice versa. So, trade with India is 1,000-year-old European wish, and the dream has come true where unitedly Europe has been able to find a trade solution with India, which is what, if I may remind you, started India's colonization to begin with, because they were just not able to agree on themselves on how they were going to do trade with India together. So I think we've solved all the problems with that. I don't see it as an uptick, I just see it as a consolidation of political will in Europe, because the EU itself, as an entity, as a supranational entity, is in constant evolution. So I think all those ducks needed to come into a row before this happened with India. It has happened, and I don't think there's any going back from it. And it will create a lot of prosperity, because not only has it been a free trade agreement, then there is a mobility agreement signed, then there is a defense and strategic agreement signed. So there's a whole menu of issues that have opened up between the two democracies. And after 1,000 years of trying to get this to work, I don't think anybody's going to let it go. So, much as 200 years of humiliation, to quote India's Foreign Minister Jaishankar, was our colonialization, I would say that this was 1,000-year-old struggle that we have finally come to conclude. So it's been a path that stopped in 1452 with the conquest of Istanbul, which has stopped with which stopped trade before that when Egypt fell to the Rashidun Caliphates. So it has been a cyclic in which India will identify with effort at creating sustainable trade between the two continents.
Was there anything that surprised you in the past few years in terms of India-Europe interactions? Surprised in a positive way?
I think there were two. I would say there were two very poignant points for me, and this was both during Prime Minister Modi's visit to Rome. I think one was his meeting with Pope Francis, which went way beyond the scheduled 20 minutes, and it was a one-on-one meeting. And I had the opportunity to speak with some people very close to His Holiness at that point, because we were really wondering how it went. And so there was a lot of us exchanging notes, but nobody really knew what happened. But I think that generated a lot of positivity, as well as his meeting with Prime Minister Draghi. And I think it was the person that made the difference. I think the common denominator in all of this was Prime Minister Modi and his wisdom in trying to push these relationships ahead. And I think he has managed to do a wonderful job and managed to unite people in typical Indian fashion. So I think these were the two very important points that changed the future of the EU-India relationship in general as well, for me at least. But then again, I'm biased. I look at it from Rome. So
Before we conclude, a lot of Indian students like to go to Europe, the West, for their higher education. What are the opportunities for Indian students in Italy, and how should they prepare themselves to access these opportunities?
well, I think it's Indian students look at going from India to a European country in a different manner than they look from going from South India to North India. But I would say it is very similar. Very few people who speak English. You should learn the language. It's easier for you to navigate if you speak the language. I think there's a huge opportunity for STEM students here, but also Italian universities are full of Sanskrit and ancient India scholars who are a treasure. Like the only Kashmiri Shaivism course is run by an Italian professor out of Orientale University in Naples, and you wouldn't find a Kashmiri Shaivism course in India at the moment in time. So my point being, there are lots of opportunities, especially in the STEM segment. All European countries are very proud of their languages, like all Indian states are very proud of their linguistic traditions. So it would be a great idea to speak some of the language of the country you're going to. Most importantly, it should not, if for students who are coming to Europe, it should not be an economic decision. Economic migrants are unhappy people. you should be a cultural migrant. You should go to the country because you like the culture, you want to live there, you want to create value there. It's like moving from Hyderabad to Delhi just because you're getting better pay but being miserable at it, rather than moving from Hyderabad to Bombay because you like the city, you feel at home, and you think you can create value. So I think what's most important is that outlook when you come to Europe, because these countries are far more livable if you like the culture rather than you're just an economic migrant.
Thank you. It's a very positive thing to say that movement of people, ideas should be about cultural richness. I hope in the near future, India and Europe will engage more with each other with a sense of purpose, and also developing a lot of economic opportunities between the two continents and also between India and Italy. Thank you, Vas, for taking out time and interacting with us, engaging with us, telling us all about the geopolitics and the geoeconomics of the India-Middle East Economic Corridor, and also about the need for greater cultural interaction between India, Italy, and India and Europe. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Sanjay. It was a
Thank you.
pleasure.